podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Geico asks, how would you love a chance to save some money on insurance? Of course you would. And when it comes to great rates on insurance, Geico can help. Like with insurance for your car, truck, motorcycle, boat, and RV. Even help with homeowners or renters coverage. Plus, add an easy-to-use mobile app, available 24-hour roadside assistance, and more, and Geico is an easy choice. Switch today and see all the ways you could save. It's easy. Simply go to geico.com or contact your local agent today.
Welcome back to the Love Tennis Podcast, where we are Georgeless this week. Our dear leader, George, has gone to the Philippines for 2 weeks for a wedding and a honeymoon. But I'm told it's not his honeymoon, but he is going on the honeymoon. We'll have to question more about this when he gets back, because it doesn't sound normal to me. I'm James Gray of the iNewspaper and iNews.co.uk. I've got Calvin Betton, our resident tennis coach, with me today. We're going to talk about everything that's been going on in tennis over the last week. We were just talking off air about everything that's been going on not in tennis over the last week. And I think if you need news about other things, you can go elsewhere. This is a tennis podcast, and realistically, you can be here to talk about tennis. We'll talk about Roger Federer, of course, and his announcement last week that he is retiring after the Laver Cup. We'll talk about the Davis Cup as well, the real team tournament, and what turned into a bit of a debacle for GB up in Glasgow. We'll talk about Emma Raducanu and some of her latest struggles, and a little bit about Naomi Osaka, who's been talking this week about the year that she's had. But really, there is only one place to start, and it is with the great Roger Federer, who has announced that this coming Laver Cup, which starts on Friday in London, will be his last tournament, or serious tournament. More on exactly what he means by that later. He will retire with 20 Grand Slam titles to his name, as well as an Olympic gold medal in doubles, as well as a Davis Cup title, Hopman Cup titles, as someone mentioned to me the other day, although I think that's significantly less important than almost anything else that he's done. One of the greatest players of all time. Is he the greatest of all time? I'm sure is an argument that will rage on for years and years to come, and one that will never have a solid answer to it. He said in his statement, "It's been a pleasure..." I've just picked up the Rafa Nadal statement rather than the Roger Federer statement. What I meant to say was, as many of you know, the past 3 years have presented me with challenges in the form of injuries and surgeries. I know my body's capacities and limits, and its message to me lately has been clear. I'm 41 years old. I've played more than 1,500 matches over 24 years. Tennis has treated me more generously than I would ever have dreamt, and now I must recognise when it is time to end my competitive career. I will play more tennis in the future, of course, but not on the Grand Slams or on the tour. It's a bittersweet decision. I was given a special talent to play tennis. I did it at a level that I never imagined for much longer than I ever thought possible. There's much more as well. It was, I think, a 900-word statement in the end. There was a lot to say, kind of inevitably. You know, Roger tends to say things at length rather than at brevity. And there's a lot to unpick in there, Calvin. But what were your first thoughts? I mean, I suppose we've kind of been talking about the fact that Roger Federer's career is over for quite a while, haven't we?
Yeah, I think that was the thing, wasn't it? It didn't come as any great surprise, because I think if you were this time last week, if you were to ask anybody, do you think he'll play another competitive tennis match on the tour or at a slam, I'd say 60% of people would have said probably no, he won't. So it wasn't really a surprise at all, I don't think. And especially last week, when was it last week or a couple of weeks ago, there was talk that he was still struggling in training and he's not able to train properly and what have you, and he didn't even know whether he was going to compete at the Laver Cup. Like, this is not sort of, a 28-year-old who's trying to get over an injury and it's taking 6 months longer than expected. It's a 41-year-old. And you can't just take out 2 years of your career at between 39 and 43, or, whatever stages that might be.
Yeah, it catches up with you very quickly. His fitness, incidentally, is still kind of under a bit of a cloud. I mean, obviously, his fitness trainer Pierre Paganini was talking in the Swiss press this week, and he said Roger will decide at the last moment. He's trained to have as much information as possible about whether it's a good idea or not. I mean, from that, Calvin, and based on what he said before, and I think also the fact that he's not playing the Swiss indoors, which is where we always thought he'd retire, in Basel, his hometown, the tournament that means so much to him. My guess is that he's not playing that because he thinks it would be, think about that third set against Hurkacz at Wimbledon and how unpleasant that was for him. I suspect he might be playing only Laver Cup and possibly only doubles for that exact reason. That's my guess anyway.
I think the thing is, when you come back from an injury, there's a difference between, like, when we talk about tennis players playing through niggles and playing through a bit of pain, and tennis players and all athletes really have to do that. It's different for athletes when they've had an injury, stroke some surgery or both, and they come back then and it still doesn't feel right. That's a bigger concern than having a niggle. You wouldn't play through a little bit of pain if you're just coming back from an injury or just had surgery, because that could potentially mess everything up. And I think we'll see him at the Laver Cup. I'd be surprised if we don't see him hitting any balls.
Yeah. I just think the most likely solution for him is to play doubles with Rafa Nadal, which is what everyone gets obsessed about anyway. I know the format doesn't really allow you to only play doubles, but they could pick him for day one to play doubles and then say, well, he's injured, and then just bring in Berrettini and who is the alternate. But it's kind of irrelevant, isn't it? I mean, I know it's technically an ATP event, but it is an exhibition event. Let's not beat around the bush.
Why can you not play doubles? Is that something that I've forgot about?
It's not that you can't play doubles. It's that everyone has to play a singles match at some point.
Right.
Like, yeah, with the rules, everyone has to play at least one singles match.
I find that bizarre that they've got that rule, because the one way of making it more competitive would be to allow the rest of the world to have some doubles pairs.
Yeah.
And some doubles players. That would make it interesting. It would also give a real boost to doubles as well. So that's really a ridiculous rule.
Yeah, but then I agree. But then equally, part of the appeal of it, or certainly the early appeal, was that you got some of the greatest players ever playing doubles and playing doubles together. But I do understand what you're saying. It does seem strange.
Yeah, I mean, look. We know, like we say, it's not strictly competitive, is it? It might be a case that they say to, rest of the world, right? You guys pick Ram and Sock, and we'll not pick. We'll not pick any doubles players. And that, there's a way of getting around it.
It is a problem. Like, I like the Laver Cup as a format. I think it's a nice idea, but it is a problem that it's just profoundly uncompetitive.
Yeah.
And I don't really see it changing anytime soon.
No, it won't. They won't get the number of people, and I think the only way that it's going to change is if they change the format of it. I didn't even know I do remember now you've mentioned it, but that would be the easiest way to do it. The obvious other one is that you make it a mixed event.
Yeah, and that is, I'm right with you there. It would be brilliant. And it's a bit like, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but Tennis Australia are revamping the ATP Cup this year, so that it is now a mixed event, and you play one men's singles, one women's singles, and a mixed doubles match. And with lots of team group stages and knockouts and the rest of it. But as a format for a tennis rubber, I think it's a really good one. And I would actually superimpose that onto like something like the Davis Cup, where you would then make it bigger and make it 5-match rubbers with 2 men's singles, 2 women's singles, and 1 mixed doubles. And I think that'd be a tremendous product. And for everything that we call the World Cup of tennis in tennis, that really would be an actual World Cup of tennis.
Yeah, I'd still like to see, though, men's and women's doubles. Like, I think that would concern me if you just make it mixed. I do think, look, the 2 best matches that we've seen in the last week have both been doubles.
Yeah.
So I would like to see that, but and also I was thinking then that they might make it a mixed event. Then all you get is Iga Swiatek chopping up every woman from the rest of the world. Not sure it would make much difference in the competitiveness of it, would it?
True enough. Anyway, we will talk about team tennis a bit more later on because we do have a Davis Cup defeat for Great Britain to discuss. But we were talking about Roger Federer, and I wanted to talk more widely about Roger Federer, as so many people have over the last couple of days. I read, and I can't remember exactly whose piece it was, but the sell on it was that he changed the game. I mean, I don't necessarily have much consciousness or specific consciousness of tennis pre-Roger Federer, Calvin, where you have the advantage of experience. Do you think Roger Federer changed the game, or did he just dominate the game?
It's a bit of both. I don't think he changed it from anything that it had never been before, but I think at the stage when he came to prominence, he changed it to a large degree because he was such a star, and tennis was really struggling for stars at that time. To somebody who was a spectacle in himself, that within about a year of him winning his first slam, people were going to tennis just to watch Roger Federer, whereas nobody was going to watch anyone who was playing in the year before him. And I know that it's a weird one, this, because like the big social media tennis fans, and a lot of people, they seem to be unwilling to acknowledge that the era before, and really at the start of Federer's career, was a pretty bad era. And they'll come back with, there were some great players in that era, like Juan Carlos Ferrero and Leighton Hewitt. And like, well, in the big scheme of things, they're not great players, are they? Those guys. They're very good players at the stages where they were playing. They were the best players in the world at the time. But none of the other players in that era would make the top 30 players of all time.
Yeah. And I think it's significant that those players didn't win or go deep regularly at slams before like Federer came along, and they didn't do so after Federer came along. Yes, that's exactly what I mean. It's not like Mark Philippoussis or Leighton Hewitt was like a really big factor in Grand Slams 10 years after he won Wimbledon. And equally, it wasn't like he was a big factor in Grand Slams, 5 years before he won Wimbledon.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they kind of... And people... I don't know whether people forget this or talk about it too much. Twitter's a bit of an echo chamber on this stuff. But, the beginning of Roger Federer's career, just because I've got it in front of me, the first 7 Slam finals were Philippoussis, Safin, Roddick, Hewitt, Roddick, Agassi, Bagdatis. And after that, then you get a lot of like Nadals and Murrays and Djokovic and the rest of it. Like, okay, Andre Agassi in 2005, I think you'd probably quite fancy playing him that year. I mean, that was right at the end, presumably.
It was a weird one then. I mean, Agassi was still up there, but again, that signified that it was a bad era. Agassi at the time, I think, was 34, and that was a time when being 34 at tennis was a complete freak situation.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like now. But he was well past his prime. I mean, Agassi won his first slam in 92.
Yeah.
So, it was... and I don't think he played a whole lot after that. I think he maybe played one more year after that, right. Agassi. So, and then, the other guys, I mean, Safin was a good player, but inconsistent. The rest of them, they're not, they're not great.
And that's not, I mean, I don't think that, like, denigrates Federer's achievements at all. I don't think you sort of asterisk 6 of his Grand Slams just because you didn't fancy the people. You can only beat the people in front of you. And it's not like he didn't then go on and beat really good players in Slam finals.
And like I said, there was some, like I said last week on the pod, at that stage, Andy Roddick looked like he was going to be a real dominant force. Like at the time, you still even thought for a couple of years that this next generation's rivalry is going to be Roddick and Federer. It was only the speed at which Nadal came on the scene, and then to a lesser degree Murray and Djokovic at that stage. They came through a little bit later and took a little bit longer. That kind of they market corrected Andy Roddick, really.
Yeah. The other stat when it comes to Grand Slam finalists about Federer is that there are only 3 men who've beaten him in a Grand Slam final, and that they are Rafa Nadal, Novak Djokovic, and Juan Martín del Potro. Which I think is actually pretty spectacular when you think about it. It's just, and I think that, there's lots of things that people will remember Roger Federer for, and lots of like non-tennis aficionados will talk about Federer's like grace and the way he moves and the shots that he hits. But for me, when I look back at the kind of statistics of his legacy, it's the consistency, like just relentless. Like being there, 10 consecutive Grand Slam finals in 2005, 2007. I mean, that's ridiculous to make 10 finals in a row. Not to mention, 23 consecutive Grand Slam semi-finals, which, that is 24 is what? That's 6 years of making at least the last 4 of every Grand Slam. I mean, that... I'm sure someone will match that, but...
His career, I think, is a bit strange. I've always thought that it's kind of mirrored, to a degree, the career that Muhammad Ali had, where the things that he's really remembered for are the things in the 1970s, when he fought Foreman and Frazier and all those guys. But he was past his best as an actual boxer by then. His best as a boxer was before his ban and all that kind of thing. And I think Federer's similar in that we remember the Nadal-Djokovic rivalries, but his best tennis was just before they came. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, and the beginning. I mean, the 08 Wimbledon final against Nadal. That fit. Not 08, 07, sorry.
No, it was 08. It was 08.
Have we got that right? Oh, the one he lost. Yes, sorry.
07 was the one he won in 5. Yeah,
that's right. I mean, that final feels like the sort of the high point of that rivalry in terms of level. I mean, obviously it was Nadal winning Wimbledon, which was a big deal for him. That felt like, and I know that's a bit of a cliche to say it was a great match, and it was, but in terms of level, I wonder if that was the best they both were at the same time.
I think so, yeah. Although you could make a strong argument that I think the best match they played was the Australian Open final in 2017.
No, after they both came back from injury.
Yeah, I think that was a phenomenal. Maybe that's some recency bias from me. You can't. You don't grade these things. They're subjective, aren't they? Yeah. But I don't think there was much difference in the quality that they were both playing in that match as to in 2008.
And they were both very. What's kind of fascinating about the Federer and Nadal rivalry is that they've both evolved a lot. Like, if you watch those two matches back to back, it would be quite fun. It would be quite long. But Federer is a totally different player now than he was then. Nadal is, to an extent, I think, is more rounded. Federer now has a backhand for a start, which I think even in 2008, arguably, he didn't really.
Something that I think gets forgotten is that when Federer was at his best in sort of pre-2000 and pre-Nadal, shall we say, he was completely dominant, and then went through this stage where I think cost him a lot of slams, where he just decided he didn't need a coach. So he just didn't have a coach for about, I can't remember the exact time, but maybe about 2 years. And I think his game just stagnated. And then Nadal came along and kind of got his foot in the door. But there is an argument that Federer, if he'd have been so driven and concentrated on making himself better constantly, he could have kind of shut Nadal out early. And I do wonder then whether Nadal would still have had the career that he had, really.
Yeah, it's interesting the kind of the push factors that Federer and Nadal put on each other. Nadal said after he retired, he said, "It's been a pleasure, but also an honour and a privilege to share all these years with you, living so many moments on and off the court." I mean, I know George would say that he doesn't buy the friendship between Federer and Nadal, and I don't totally buy it either. Like, I think they're pretty different characters. But what is definitely true is that they have pushed each other in different ways and to new heights, because I think they tested each other in such kind of unique ways.
I think some people get a bit obsessed both ways with that friendship. You get people who think they're best mates, which they're not, and then you get people like George and Briggsy who just refuse to acknowledge that they even like each other. Whereas I don't think it's like that. I think it's, look, we've all got mates that we're like, we know they're mates. We won't speak to them for 3 or 4 months at a time, and then you'll run into them somewhere and you'll have a good chat. And I think they're just like that. They're normal people. They're no different. And they see each other all the time. They see each other all the time. I've no doubt that. I don't think they're going out for dinner every night when they're on the tour. But it wouldn't surprise me if they go out for dinner 4 or 5 times a year at the slams.
Yeah, that would make sense. I asked you at the beginning of the podcast, did Federer change the game? One way I think in which he has changed the game, and you may disagree, Calvin, is in the kind of off-court business side of things. He could end up making more money in his career, and probably will, from off-court stuff than on-court, and maybe even post-career than during career. He might well end up becoming a billionaire. He's invested in lots of companies. His own brand is incredibly valuable. I mean, was he really the first to stop being just an athlete and be a business sports person?
I'll say just before I go into that, James, I'll answer that in a minute. But in terms of changing the game, the only thing I think you could, when I didn't get to it the first time, I think the game was becoming very one-dimensional, very power-based, and a bit boring in the characters and that kind of thing at that stage. I think Federer came back and brought around this stylish all-court game back into it. So I think, yeah, he changed the game back to what to something it had been previously. But yeah, in terms of was he the first? No, I think Michael Jordan would be the first.
That's
I
what
would say.
thinking, yeah.
But then, yeah, he's been a weird one actually, hasn't he? Because you don't see him as being as prominent as Jordan or even Tiger Woods in the media and that kind of thing. But the finances show that he is.
Well, I think the reason for that is because he took so much of it onto himself. You know, he obviously started the management company with Tony Godsick, a teammate, and kind of took his own management out of the hands of someone else. And that's something that you see increasingly with athletes. You know, Naomi Osaka, of course, has done it with Stuart Duguid and is signing up players to that to kind of give players and athletes a bit more ownership, literally and figuratively, of their own career, and that obviously financially has a pretty big effect because, you know, straight off the bat you're not losing 10 or 15% of everything you make. So and I think the sum of the parts of that move is greater than the whole. The other answer, I should say. What I also think is interesting, and you mentioned, yeah, he's not super visible, is, yeah, he's created this kind of almost ethereal brand where it's like he's not overexposed, and actually everything that's related to Roger Federer is still very kind of high end and has that, because you don't see him a lot. Maybe that's it.
He is huge. I mean, I mentioned this a bit. Like I call it, it's like the O2 test. Like if bands or comedians or sports people were to play at the O2, how many nights would they sell out? Yeah. And Federer would fill out. I'm certain he'd sell out a month. Like 5 days a week for a month, all day long. People would just go and watch Roger Federer play tennis, and it doesn't really matter who the other person is.
No, you're absolutely right.
He's a huge name, but yeah, I think it is. You know, it's not like he's had loads of brands either, is it? They've been very smart with that. They've just gone to big brands. Yeah, they didn't sort of blanket market it and everything. He was just, you know, I mean, it's funny because my dad said to me last week when. I saw my dad when the news had just broke, and he said, "Oh, that clothing company will be a bit pissed off that they signed him." And I said to him, "They must have known, they must have planned for this. That they knew he was. Look, you sign how old was it at the time? 38-year-old.
Yeah.
To a 10-year deal. You know they're not going to be playing tennis at 48.
So, yeah, exactly.
I imagine that. Yeah, I think they've probably Uniqlo have probably factored in. We're going to get the legacy stuff out of it here."
And yeah, presumably, you know, he's not going to stop selling Roger Federer hats and shirts and all of that, and he will still be an ambassador for the brand, and he might even be a more regular and more kind of visible ambassador for the brand now he's not playing tennis, or at least not trying to play tennis.
Look, you can still buy, and I know this because there's a shop in Barnsley that sells them, you can still buy Bjorn Borg Fila tennis tops, and they're 70 quid a pop.
Oh my God.
Brand new. And that was
incredible.
40 years ago.
And 70 quid in Barnsley is a lot.
I don't know who's buying them. You can buy the shorts as well. I don't know who the blooming hell's buying them in Barnsley. They've got some lemon yellow shorts, and they're very short.
Crikey. Sounds like a must-have item for your Christmas basket this year. There's also the thing about his logo, you know, that he kind of created. They created this brand with Nike, and eventually he regained or sort of bought out the rights to that logo, which was a cleverly done deal. And just understanding, I think he understands that world quite well. He's now obviously bought himself into a big trainer company, which is basically partially leveraged off his name, which, you know, is a great way to cash in. I mean, I know you're a big trainer guy, Calvin. I'm always staggered by the amount of money people will spend on trainers.
I'm staggered by the amount of money I spend on trainers. So, yeah, the tennis trainers really have, and those, how do you say, On? Is that what they call his brand?
Yeah, I think that's what it's called. It's definitely like a really unmemorable name.
And a staggering amount of people have got them. Like I've never, be fair, I've never seen them in shops, but a couple of my mates have got running shoes by the brand. I don't know anybody who's got the tennis shoes. Right. I know Henry, who I coach, has got a pair of the running shoes as well. But yeah, they're not cheap, are they?
No.
And yeah, and tennis shoes are a bit of a strange one. You know, I know that, and you know, there will be good tennis shoes if Federer's endorsed them. The players tend to know what they want from a tennis shoe.
Yeah, I bet.
But yeah, it's a staggering amount of money, and tennis shoes are expensive. Now, you're not picking up a pair of proper tennis shoes. You're not picking a pair up for less than £100.
It's like when I was in Madrid on holiday, we were going around like Plaza de Catalunya or something like that, and there was like basically a fight outside, like maybe not Primark, but it was a shop like that, and it was a load of like young lads, and like there was a security guard at the front, but then there was a sort of queue, and there was a bit of a scrap, but it was reasonably good natured, and I just couldn't work out what it could possibly be. And then I like Googled trainer release dates. Yeah. And I realized that like a new trainer comes out like every 2 days. I mean, it's relentless. Like multiple different from the same company a week. I thought it was like a Coldplay album. I thought it was like once a year.
No, there's like, and there's these shops now that have popped up. I noticed there's now 2 in Leeds. There's some in London where you think they sell the trainer, but they don't. You go in and they have the trainer there.
Yeah.
And then they will find you the pair and bid on it for you, and you tell them how much you're willing to pay. It's almost like an active eBay type thing. And you say the trainers are known, people know them, they're well-known trainers, but they have one sample there, and you say, I'm willing to go to £500 for these, and they'll see if they can find you them for £500 plus a commission.
That's bizarre.
Yeah,
that's so weird.
They're popping up everywhere. So, but I think they're for more the lifestyle type trainers. Yeah. They're not for. I think with tennis trainers though, it might be a boring subject, but that is one of the things that costs up and coming tennis players and parents a lot of money is trainers, because you're going, like I say, you're probably looking at £100 for a pair. You can pick them up occasionally in the sale, but they sell out quick.
What's the kind of like wear, or like how long would you expect?
I mean, if you're say 18 and above and playing 3 hours a day for 5 days a week, you're probably getting 6 weeks out of them at best. And then, but then the problem is, then you have the sort of like Nike are probably, if you're getting them for free, which a lot of the players do, the Nike ones, the Federer shoe is probably the best tennis shoe, but it doesn't last the 6 weeks. You're probably getting 3 weeks out of them.
Wow.
And then the flip side of that is you can get the Adidas Barricade, which is renowned for being the most durable, but it's heavy because of that. So a lot of the players don't like playing in them.
I see. What a weird world at the best of times.
Yeah.
I have one last kind of Federer subtopic, which is he, albeit not for the last 4 years, but he has spent a decade and a half winning Grand Slams. You know, he started winning Grand Slams at 22. He, as it turned out, finished winning Grand Slams 15 years later in 2018. Do you think it's realistic that someone else is able to do that? Or is tennis such now that we're just not going to have these kind of single player or kind of duopolies like we had? And that actually the field is a bit wider now, and it's hard to imagine someone coming in and winning 20 slams over 15 years.
Yeah, my gut feeling would be that it's probably not going to happen. But then we've had 3 guys who've just made it happen, so you never know. Maybe the game's changed. I don't know. I find it a bit strange that we grade this GOAT debate on slam numbers. Because I remember when Pete Sampras was coming through, and when he got the record, he took it off Roy Emerson. Roy Emerson had 11, I think. And nobody saw that as definitive clarification that Sampras is the greatest ever, because not many people considered Roy Emerson to be the best ever.
Right.
It's only now that we kind of think that whoever ends with the most slams is the GOAT.
Do you think it's kind of reverse engineered because it just happens that the three of them are all in the same kind of ballpark in terms of numbers?
Probably, yeah, probably. Yeah, you wonder what would have happened if one of them had come through 5 years later, and was only on 10. Like, would that? Yeah. Well, look at Murray. To be fair,
Yeah.
It is. He's in there.
Yeah, it is a wild stat, isn't it? Because you've got these three guys on 2021-22, and then there are no active players with more than three. It's just and I think if you look at, there's basically Sampras, and then the next most recent player on the list is Agassi with 8.
Yeah, Agassi had 8. But again, the way that those guys did it, then like Agassi took huge chunks out of his career where he was just not competitive at the top of the game. McEnroe was kind of the same, and I don't think they ever really judged it on number of slams won before. But now they seem to, and or the fans seem to.
And if that's the case, then Federer is not the GOAT, which
well, quite, yeah. But then nobody thought Nadal was. It was always seemed to be that the debate was going where it's Federer or Djokovic, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get stuck into the GOAT debate too much, but I find it hard to think, because I grew up in like the age that I am and the age that I was, like Federer equaled tennis. Like when people talked about tennis, if there was a good video game like the Tiger Woods golf game, it would have been called Roger Federer Tennis, because that's what tennis was about. And then there was this kind of slightly weird-looking Spanish bloke who always won the French Open, and he was quite good. And that was it. Like there were no other tennis players, basically. That was all it was about. So in that sense, like, I don't know if Djokovic has had, and there are lots of reasons and lots of arguments and counter-arguments, but I don't know if Djokovic has had the recognition, rightly or wrongly, that Federer had, and that synonymity with tennis. Maybe Djokovic has, but I don't feel like there was ever a time when you said the word tennis to someone who doesn't really follow sport, and they're like, "Oh yeah, Novak Djokovic, I really like him." Or,
I don't think he ever transcended the sport to the degree that the others did. Ironically, actually, I don't know whether it's ironic or not. The time when he has actually transcended the sport is all because of vaccines.
Yeah,
and so maybe that's actually brought him into the wider world. Weird.
Yeah. Turns out that actually the vax controversy is what has put Djokovic back into the GOAT debate.
Yeah, that's it.
50 love.
The where loose change makes something of itself deal. Because only at McDonald's can a stop at the toll booth turn into an impromptu breakfast stop.
Welcome to McDonald's. Can I take your order?
It's hard to beat any size McCafe iced coffee for 99 cents until 11 a.m. But pairing it with the new Cheese Danish is a good way to try. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Hi, I'm Hannah Cockcroft, and on the latest Paralympics GB podcast, I'm celebrating the 10th anniversary of London 2012 as I look back on the landmark games with the help of some of my fellow Paralympians, like double gold medalist in 2012 Natasha Baker.
Now, I've always said if I can inspire somebody like I was inspired, then that's worth another gold medal, because it's just showing that actually, despite everything, you can do whatever you want to as long as you've got a dream.
Listen now, search the Paralympics GB podcast wherever you find your podcast.
The Paralympics GB podcast with Hannah Cockcroft.
I've just seen a bizarre piece of social mediaing from the US Open account, who have posted a picture of Roger Federer walking out at Arthur Ashe, like, from in between the blue walls. But then they've photoshopped his retirement statement onto the wall next to him. Really odd. Really odd.
Yeah.
Anyway, there you go. I mean, I do think these retirements, I have to say, and we've just done a whole half of a podcast on this, so we won't dwell on it too much longer, but I have to say, having just done like a couple of weeks of Serena Williams kind of obits, essentially, I can't, and I'm on holiday for the next 10 days, so it doesn't really matter, but I can't really stomach another couple of weeks of look back, look forward, kind of almost like, I don't want to use the phrase circle jerk, because they both deserve plaudits, but, you know, when you also combine that with the, you know, longest reigning monarch in British history, and lots of retrospectives and lots of think pieces about what the world would look like after that, I just don't think I can cope with any more kind of sepia-toned tributes.
Better hope that Andy Murray don't call it before the interview.
Well, I mean, a lovely segue there, Calvin, because, of course, Andy Murray has been upset this week. He was playing in the Davis Cup in Glasgow for Great Britain in the Davis Cup finals group stages. So this is a 4-team group, the top 2 of which then go to Malaga in November for the quarterfinals, semi-finals and final. Great Britain looked like they would surely get out of this group, but in true British fashion, you could argue, they have failed to get out of what looked like a very winnable group. They lost to the United States in their first match. Every match went to 3 sets, and they lost the doubles, Murray and Salisbury losing to Ram and Sock 2-1, and they then lost to the Netherlands to knock them out. Cam Norrie losing to Botic van der Zandsloop, and then Murray and Salisbury losing to Wesley Koolhof and Matwé Middelkoop in... Well, I don't know if that is an upset, quite frankly, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. They did beat Kazakhstan, but in what was a dead rubber on Sunday. There was a singles win for Andy Murray there, but it means that Great Britain are indeed out of the Davis Cup. Netherlands qualifying with 3 wins, incredibly. Not something I would have predicted. And the US also going through despite losing in what as I say, was a dead rubber on Saturday. Calvin, certainly a shock to not make it through this group. I think we'd agree on that. You know, they were all close matches, so maybe you could say this happens. You flip enough coins, you're going to lose some.
There's definitely that argument, yeah. And it's hard to... I mean, we'll get into the decisions that the captain made, but it's hard to really pinpoint where it went because there were so many turning points on both sides, both within the matches and the matches themselves. So, yeah, they were close matches. You could argue that at least one of them shouldn't have been close, but it ended up being.
Yeah, as you say, some, I don't know if controversial is the right word, but some selection decisions that created arguments or disagreements at least. Specifically, I suppose, playing Murray in the doubles alongside Salisbury. Murray obviously isn't a specialist doubles player, whereas Neil Skupski, the 5th member of the team, is the world number 3 doubles player. He got to the final of the US Open where he was beaten by Salisbury and Ram. He was playing with Koolhof. Intriguing that all 4 of them were involved in this tie. I mean, Leon was pretty directly asked about this. He said, is it that controversial to put your 2 highest ranked singles players, in this case Evans and Norrie, each of whom lost 1 match in the 2 defeats? No. Is it controversial to put them out there? No. Is it controversial to put the number 1 doubles player in the world out there? No. Is it controversial to put Andy Murray out there on court here in Glasgow? I don't think so. We believe that was the right thing to do. That's on me. Do you agree, Calvin? Was putting Murray in that doubles team the right thing to do?
I think controversial is the wrong word. Like, was it controversial? No, but then that doesn't mean it was right. I happen to think it was right. I think I'd have done the same thing. But again, that doesn't mean it was right. I think I'd have done the same thing, but I don't know. Look, numerous people have asked me about this, and my position is this, is that you can make a very strong argument for any one of the 4 pairs, any one of the pairs that could have been put out there.
Yeah.
Like, you could have had Murray-Salisbury, as they did. You could have had Salisbury-Skupski, as they did. You could have had... It wasn't off the table that you could have had Murray-Evans.
Yeah.
You could have had You could have had Evans-Skupski, who've been successful before.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just a case of Joe and one other, I don't think. But no, you could argue. I'm not going to hang Leon up for picking Murray over Neil Skupski. Look, if it goes the other way and you lose 2 close ties, which is what happened, and you left Andy Murray on the bench, The thing about being Glasgow makes no difference because the stadium wasn't even that big anyway. So it's not like you were going to ramp it up or anything. And what more could they have done? The crowd cheered a lot. So, but whether you want to go out losing 2 close ties and not have Andy Murray on the court, and let's be straight, right? We can go this, Murray doesn't play doubles, right? Andy Murray won a Davis Cup playing doubles with his brother. And if he chose to play doubles, I'm quite certain he'd be in the top 5 in the world if he just played doubles. So, and did he play? Can you hold it up and say he was terrible? No, absolutely not. Played a good game. You know, it's the decision for me that isn't the controversial one. There was another, what you could say, controversial decision, which was that Louis Kai wasn't there,
right?
For one reason or another, and that, having lost 2 doubles, I can see a strong argument in picking any of the doubles pairings. I can't see a strong argument in Louis Kai not being there, especially not if you've gone and lost the tie, and lost going through on 2 doubles matches.
Yeah, for people who don't know, and there will be some new listeners who don't necessarily know Louis' work, he has pretty much led the reinvention of British doubles for, I mean, how long has he been working for the LTA now?
Since 2006, I think.
Yeah, there you go. 15, 16 years, and has turned, British doubles into a really feared unit, and has, a system that all of his players play. And yeah, you can understand how a tactician like him, or just someone who knows the game as well as he does, being around would have been handy. But he will now not get the chance to go to Malaga for the Davis Cup finals either. I suppose it should be said, Calvin, we've talked a lot about the British. These 2 teams they lost to were decent. I mean, the Americans are having their best year for years in the men's singles side, and Ram and Sock are an elite doubles pair. Yeah,
look, it's one of those, isn't it? We're arguing there about Andy Murray coming in, but America could have played. I think without knowing for certain, I think there are Americans that are ranked higher than Jack Sock in doubles.
Yeah.
So they chose to put him in, and there was no shock there. But Jack Sock's a phenomenal doubles player.
Yeah.
For one particular reason, that's because he has a huge forehand.
Yeah.
And Rajiv Ram is brilliant and was brilliant in that match. The Dutch one, I think, I've got to say, I think was a bad loss. I don't think, as much as Wesley Koolhof is a decent player, he's a decent player. I don't. Medal Coop is a solid player. I'd say. I don't think that Andy and Joe should be losing to them.
Yeah. And yeah, and it was close. The first 2 sets were tie breaks. Murray and Salisbury got beaten 7-0 in the first one, and then won the second one 8-6. So it's a close match but that's doubles, isn't it? I mean, it's so tight so often.
Yeah, that's what would concern me actually with the pairings, that they lost the first set losing 7 points in a row, obviously in the tie break, and they having been a break up, and I think had points for 4-love. As well in the first set. Now that would be my problem. They should have shut them down. The Dutch looked nervous as hell at the start of the match. I think they could have shut them down, and they kind of let them back in, and then gave a breakaway easy, and suddenly it was back on. But the concern for me would be losing 7 points in a row to lose the first set, and then losing the last 11 points of the match. Because they, from break point up, I think at 3-all, they lost the next 11 points to lose the match.
Yeah, that is ugly.
And that's not a great look for anybody. And I think, at any level of tennis, singles, doubles, or anything, any coach would say, I mean, we go back to, you could bring the old Roy Keane meme in there where he goes, smash into somebody and like do something. Like, you've got to do something. You obviously can't smash into somebody at tennis, but you've got to do something to not lose. 11 points in a row is phenomenal. You don't get runs like that ever.
Yeah. We could dwell on this all day because it's kind of fascinating, and that's what I think is great about team tennis. I think it creates lots of really interesting combinations and situations that you don't get. And as I've said to you before, Calvin, I'm all for the tennis tour using more different formats. Like, a tournament being a different country is not a different enough thing.
I think what I meant to say there was, like, there's this idea that has been bandied around, and I have subscribed to it in the past, that doubles players are just failed singles players, and that's where they get there. I've come to think that that's not necessarily the case now, and I kind of like to think it's kind of like I liken it to two different formats. It's kind of like cricket having test players and one-day players, and some people can do both.
Yeah.
But just if you put the test team in a 2020, it doesn't mean they'll win. And I think that's what we saw at the weekend, that the doubles pairs or the doubles players kind of looked strong. And that was in all, not just in the British tie, in all the ties that I watched. They're kind of playing, they see the court in different in terms of angles, the shots that you try and that kind of thing that you'll never play in singles. You can play in doubles that are game changers. And I think that's what we're seeing. So it's not strictly a case of, well, the singles player, if the singles players played doubles, they'd definitely be the best doubles players. I don't think it's that straightforward now.
No. If you take, for example, the Spain-Serbia tie, because I watched a fair bit of that, Dusan Lajovic and Nikola Cacic are probably better singles players than Pedro Martinez and Marcel Granollers, but Martinez and Granollers play a lot of doubles. And that was one of those ones that showed. And the teams that would go deep in this tournament, they all have pretty much, apart from maybe Canada, because Felix is playing doubles. But Felix plays a lot of doubles,
Felix plays a lot of doubles,
but most of them have a specialist doubles pair, and then two singles players, and then their fifth is, the guy who subs in. I don't know.
The thing is, though, James, where even the singles guys who play a lot of doubles, and you can play both, there are certain shots at doubles that you would never play in singles. So you wouldn't practice them. Yeah. You wouldn't ever be in a position to play them. So that's where there are very few guys, and this is where Sock is quite unique, who can they flip between the two, so they don't just bring their singles game onto the doubles court. They almost change to a completely different player.
Right.
And then play doubles. And there's not many who can do that.
Yeah. I can see that. We talked a bit. Well, we mentioned the format, and for people who don't know, this has been group stages across Europe. 4 of them over the last week. 4 teams in each one. They all play each other, and the top 2 teams go into November's finals in Malaga, which is straight knockout in the same format: 2 singles, 1 doubles. Calvin, how do you feel about it?
I can see. Look, we had a discussion in the WhatsApp group. I can see the benefit of it. I do. I still would like to see home and aways a lot more, but I kind of get how that's difficult. And let's not look at it through rose-tinted glasses. You weren't getting the players out in the old format. I wonder whether there's a space for a combination of the two. Yeah. Like maybe these ones now, what they're doing, like the 2 stages of it. Maybe you could just do all of these matches, 1 match, home and away, and then they all go and play the finals at the end of the year. I think that might be a better idea.
Yeah, I think basically sacking up, because the thing is with these group stages is it reduces it from 24 teams down to 12. So the other way to reduce 24 to 12 is to have 12 home and away ties, and it's and you'll say, oh, but that's brutal. Just have 1 tie to get into the finals. Like, well, Davis Cup's always been like that. Like it's always been brutal.
Odd. Yeah, and then if you lose, you're in the Vauxhall Conference, and if you win, you're in the Champions League.
Exactly.
There's not really any in between.
No, but that pressure is great. I mean, I think you want good pressure cooker for players, and I think it brings out great tennis. Incidentally, we're talking about doubles pairs and pressure. I mean, is there a better pressure pair than the German doubles lads, Kevin Kravitz and Tim Puetz, who I think are now 9-0 in Davis Cup ties, which is completely incredible. They helped Germany to victories over France, Belgium, and Australia, so that they go through top of their group. It's crazy.
I mean, they're very good anyway. They're also very good indoor tennis players,
right,
as well. And I think that kind of helps them. They both hit the ball very flat. They serve pretty well. They know how to play doubles again. And they're excellent. I think, just going back to that point again about how you get around it, James, I think another problem with it as well was that a lot of the countries, in order to get favour, which you can't blame them for, they were playing the surface that the other team would hate playing on most.
Yeah.
And so the other teams would the other players from other teams would go. Say for example, Andy Murray had come off the US Open, and then he would generally be going to Shanghai next to play on the hard still. And then, like, say they'd have to play Argentina. Argentina would go, right, we're going to play on the slowest clay court at altitude. And the players would go, no, I'm just not going then. Yeah. So I think the only way around it was that maybe the Davis Cup would have to, or maybe the team that had won it the previous year would declare what surface the whole tournament is played on.
Yeah.
And then you can't be having different surfaces and that kind of thing.
No, because, I mean, Britain always played on clay away from home. I mean,
yeah,
always.
All the time, yeah.
Yeah, even the final that they actually won against Belgium was...
But then we do it the other way as well. We'd have stuff like getting, after the US Open, I think one year we stuck maybe the semis on grass at Wimbledon in September. and like, you know, so the other team, whoever it was, would go, no, I'm not going back on grass for 3 days. Like, so I think you'd have to, that's the only way around it, I would think.
Yeah, fair enough. It means that we've got, I think, a pretty tasty... I mean, even though I won't be there because Britain haven't made it, it's actually a really tasty set of courses. Italy versus the US, Germany versus Canada, Spain against Croatia, and Netherlands against Australia. If you get everyone at that tournament, which, fingers crossed, you do, you know, you could potentially have Nadal there. You could have maybe even Kyrgios might come across for that, who knows. Berrettini as well, the likes of Taylor Fritz, Alexander Zverev might be fit by then. Obviously, the Canadian team, which doesn't have Shapovalov in it at the moment, but you'd think might do by then. I mean, I don't know which of those teams sticks out for you. I mean, if Zverev comes back with the Germans' record in doubles, you'd think that they've got a pretty good chance.
Yeah, it's very even. It's a good contest, isn't it? I would say. And, you know, USA, it can be... Ram and Sok are a tough pair to play against. Like, it's that's because the way that they gel as well. Last week I thought it's going to be a problem as to who plays on the deuce side, but Rajiv was excellent on the deuce side. Didn't seem to bother him one bit. So they're going to be tough. Although you don't know now, because if TFO steps up and he starts becoming a serious singles player again, they've then got options on that front. Australia will be tough. If Kyrgios plays, imagine they'll bring Kokkinakis as well. So
and then then you've got a good problem to have. They then have to decide who they pick in doubles, because obviously they've got an established pair with Ebden and Purcell, but Kyrgios and Kokkinakis are both pretty elite. I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, and you can imagine Kyrgios being vocal about who should play in that, can't you? So I don't know what the team chemistry would be like there.
Yeah, quite. Well, this is, and again, I say it so much. This is why I love the team tennis tournaments. When they get them right, and when the format is right, and when they get the people there, I think it's really great content, as they say. Yeah. Let's move on to one of our favourite subjects. It's Emma Raducanu, because she is back in her first outing since losing her US Open title, since returning to a kind of normal level, the clean slate, she called it. You don't get many cleaner slates, I reckon, than Portoroz in September, which looked like one of the poorest attended tournaments I can remember actually bothering to watch. She beat Diana Yastremska in the first round. Well, I was going to say in straight sets, but she retired 5-3, 30-love down in the second set. So I'm calling it a straight sets win, because it effectively is. Raducanu was then beaten by Annalena Friedsam, the German, in what was a very weird match on lots of fronts. It was very windy. It's an Adriatic coastal town, and it's sort of very late summer, early autumn, and it was very windy. The ball was flying everywhere. Raducanu seemed to get injured at the end of the first set, wasn't moving very well, got treatment on her thigh, and then won the next set 6-love, which was very, and then lost the match, but didn't seem to be struggling too badly. I spoke to some of her people afterwards, and they said, well, we think it's all right, we'll just head to Seoul as planned, which is where she is now, out in South Korea. Calvin, you're obviously well used to these tournaments with not many spectators. It obviously is a different feel, but do you think she'll be quite glad to maybe just fly under the radar a bit? And, you know, it has been a difficult year. I know we say lots of things about Emma Raducanu, but that you can't deny the fact it's been a hard 12 months in lots of different ways. Do you think maybe in terms of filling in the gaps and remembering what it's like to dominate tennis matches again, going and doing it at these 250s might be a bit of fun?
Yeah. I mean, to a degree, yeah. Although I think anybody would always rather play in a full stadium at a slam than this kind of thing. I think what is important, and look, take away from the tennis, I noticed that she seems to have been socializing a bit this week with a few of the other British girls, and I think that's probably good for her. I think it'd be nice for her to have, I think there's a few British girls out. They were there last week, and I think they've gone to Seoul, and I think she's friends with them, and I think it'd be good for her, just to live a little bit on that front. So she can almost take a bit of time off the having to win tennis matches and just see a bit of the world, and she'll be fine in tennis terms, no doubt about that. She doesn't have to start winning now. Even she might do that.
It's an interesting point to make, actually. I suppose I hadn't really thought about it like that, that most people, because success tends to be just sort of, gradated and relatively linear, they spend time making friends on the tour, just working their way up it. And when they become successful, they usually know lots of people, whereas I suppose, Raducanu really didn't, to an extent. She didn't have that time on tour just getting to know lots of different people, and then had 12 months of being whisked around and working for lots of different people and constantly lots of demands on your time. And, she said it, actually. I was sat down with her at the US Open doing a pool interview, and she said, I've got no time to be myself now. Like, I'm never have time just to be Emma. And that, never mind how true it is, I'm sure it's how she feels, and that must be pretty grim, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm not speculating. I don't know if this is the case at all with Emma, but I know a lot of people in that position. They also have people around them actively making sure that they're not spending time doing nothing,
right,
and socializing and just hanging around in the players' lounge and having a chat or going out to dinner. They'll have people there, specifically, I think, on the women's tour, who will, and it can be a parent or an agent or management. It's usually a parent, making sure that they are just eating with them and then going back to their room and doing not a lot else. And I think that's why you do get these sort of sad stories, I think, particularly in the women's game. Where in the men's game, and look, as we've discussed before, and I hope I'm not saying anything that is controversial here, but the girls don't socialize as much as the men do, right down the levels. If you go to one of the joint tournaments right down, in any sort of challenger that has them both on, or in Greece or anywhere like that, I'd say that all of the male players all know each other, and 90% of them get on. They'll be playing pool together. They'll go out for dinner. They'll have drinks in the bar after. The female players they're on court, and then you won't see them until the next day they're on court, unless you see them somewhere eating dinner, usually with their parents or their coach.
It's interesting. So there's a cultural kind of difference around the tournament.
I think for sure there's it's not. I think it's 100% the case that with not 100. Look, you'll get a few girls who they've got their friends from back home, and they'll but that's not the norm. That's the exception.
So I guess the two players' lounges feel very different. I mean,
well, it's usually the same players' lounge. It's like but it's. The male players would. I know the guys who I coach, they know everybody at every tournament, and vice versa, and that kind of thing, and they're mates with them, but not so much on the girls' front.
It's interesting. As I say, she's out in Seoul this week, where she's the number 6 seed, which, given that she is her entry ranking for this tournament was about 80, maybe says a little bit about the field in Seoul. It is a 250. There's only 2 top 50 players in the field, Ostapenko and Katerina Alexandrova. Presumably, if you're Raducanu and you're turning up to a tournament like this, you would think, well, I can be winning tournaments like this. And my kind of wider question on that, Calvin, is if you were her coach sitting down with her, for today, tomorrow, and saying, let's create a goal for the next 12 months, what do you think a realistic goal for the next 12 months for someone like Raducanu is?
I'm tempted to make a joke there that if I was Emma Raducanu's coach, I wouldn't be planning for 12 months ahead. Very good. You left me an open goal there. But let's say we would. I think her aim will be to get inside. First aim will be to get inside the top 50.
Yeah.
And I think then all you're looking at is you're probably looking at. I mean, I think I think a realistic one always in tennis, and it's a broad one, but you always look to half your ranking every year.
Right.
I think. So, and I think that would probably be a success for her.
Yeah.
If in a year's time she's ranked 35, I think that would be a pretty. If the 35 has come on the basis of a consistent year rather than she goes and wins a Masters series and has a terrible year otherwise.
Yeah.
I think that would be a decent year. But
yeah, for sure.
The problem is I don't know how many people around her would see that as a decent year. Would it be, would they think, would her sponsors or, people around her think she needs to be back in the top 10?
Well, this is also the thing, and I'm not basing this on any privileged information or any contacts that have told me this, but just talking around the game and talking to people, other journalists and people who work in it, is that if you're HSBC or British Airways and you've shelled out for this big deal, how happy are you with Emma Raducanu grinding her way to the quarters of 250s? When you've paid big figures, big sums to go and sponsor her. I mean, I suspect they won't care too much, but, and probably for a year at least there is a grace period. But
it's one of them, I definitely don't have any sympathy with them. They should have known,
Well, yeah.
Look at it, look at the women's tour for the last 5 years. Look at it and go like, is there a chance that this is the peak of it? I don't think it will be, and I hope it's not for Emma. But anyone who's that's what those companies should be looking at. You don't buy a guarantee, on any of those things. You could have thought you had a guarantee with Naomi Osaka, and you're not getting a guarantee there.
No, and it's an interesting point, and it's worth talking about Naomi Osaka because she has been talking this week. It's a big week for her because the Tokyo event is back this week. She is the top seed. She's obviously an absolutely massive draw in Tokyo because she, of course, represents Japan. She is, of course, has Japanese heritage, and it's a massive market at the best of times. She was talking about how tough it's been over the last 12 months. She said leaving or falling out of the top echelons of tennis. She said it was kind of hard at first just because I feel I should be somewhere where I'm obviously currently not. I think for me, it's more about being at peace with myself. I know that I'm here for a reason. Which, I actually have found it quite hard to watch the kind of public... I don't want to use the word breakdown because that's a very loaded term, but the kind of Naomi Osaka living out her trying to grow as a person in the public domain has been very hard to watch. And you sort of think, oh, Naomi, I wish she just... I was quite glad when she took time off because she clearly needed it. But it's been interesting that she's been so candid. And maybe she sounds a bit more settled now. I mean, Calvin, the thing is, from the outside, irrespective of the psychological status, it seems to me that she keeps playing and getting injured, and that really the only thing that's going to change that is playing regularly and getting your body ready for those rigours, right?
I think that's both physically and mentally, though, in that the times when I've seen her play when she hasn't been injured, she's lacked match tightness. I think she's lost a couple of matches to Anisimova, and I thought that's just match tightness. But she's never going to gain match tightness because she tends to not play, whether that be through injury sometimes or because she openly admits that she likes to play as little tennis tournaments as possible.
Yeah.
And I think now in this era, when you've got some girls who can really play now, I don't think she's going to be able to just roll in and play 10 tennis tournaments a year.
And maybe that realization will come. And, at some point you'd think she's got to go, well, either I'm not going to play tennis at all because bombing out in the first or second round every week isn't fun, or I'm going to have to try and stomach a year of hardcore tour life and let's see how that goes for me. Because you've still got to think, there's nothing to suggest if she did that, she would be world number one.
I'd still think she could be, for sure. She has the biggest weapons in the game. But at the same time, I don't know the way to put this. I mean, it's a strange one. She's never been the most consistent player. She's always been a bit up and down results-wise. Even between winning the slams, she'd bomb out. But that's the way she has to play. She has to she swings the racket and you roll the dice and see what happens. Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting 12 months to see 6 months even, to see where Naomi goes. I really hope she gets back to it, because I think that she's tennis's biggest superstar. I think and that's male and female, when she's winning.
And she's absolutely box office to watch as well. I think not just a superstar off the court. She's a genuinely really great tennis player to watch when
phenomenal
she's firing.
tennis player.
I mean, I was at that Osaka Anisimova match at the French Open, and it was on Longlen, and it was 11 in the morning, and so it was a bit cold and miserable. But because of where the press seats are there, you're right, like you're in the gunner, you're right behind the server, and watching those two for what was a really high level match for at least the first 40 minutes sort of go at it. It was amazing. Like, it really is just there is definitely quality there, clearly. I think that's probably all we've got time for this week. We haven't got George to ramble on about his knee or his tennis exploits, but no doubt that when he gets back from the Philippines, he'll give us a full rundown on his latest injuries. I'm James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. He's Calvin Betton. Please do follow us on Twitter at Love Tennis Pod. If you've got any comments, concerns, questions for Calvin, please do drop us an email, lovetennispod@gmail.com. We love getting them. We always read them out. Do leave us a rating or a review. There's so many ways you can get in touch with us these days. There's really no excuse not to. As my mother says, why haven't you rung more recently? Or hello, as I tend to go for. But please do, most importantly, come back next week.
Sports Social Podcast Network.